Hey, this is Nathan Meunier, and in episode number 6, I'm going to talk about minimizing risk as an indie developer, which is something that you really want to think about regardless of the size of your studio and regardless of kind of the types of projects you're making, because not every game idea that you're going to come up with, even if it's a good game, is necessarily going to do well when you launch it. And this is something I've learned the hard way over the course of several projects, releasing games on Steam and other platforms that, even when you have a game that you feel pretty confident about, it doesn't mean it's going to be selling enough to kind of make ends meet or even like break even. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm in launch week of, I think I'm on day 5 maybe, of my latest game, Missile Cards, which was intentionally designed to be a very short, quickly produced project where I made something polished and fun and kind of feature complete as quickly as possible and then prepped it and launched it. And I set a goal to sell 5,000 copies by the end of this month. And right now, I think I'm on day 5, so almost done the first week of launch. And I kind of went into this knowing that there's a good chance this might not, that goal might be a little bit too ambitious, but you never know because, for 5,000 copies, like an indie game that actually does pretty well is going to potentially make a lot more than that in the first, couple of days if it catches fire. But you just can't assume that that's going to be the case. And I kind of mentally prep myself for the fact that there's a good chance this game's not going to do well, even though I'm really happy with it and people seem to be really enjoying it. So that's kind of where I'm at this point. So after I think 5 days of launching on Steam, Missile Cards has sold 139 copies, which that's not bad. That's, that's some income, but that's way less than what I was hoping for. And it's really far from my 5,000 copy goal. So I have some hustling to do, but at the same time, it's like I've been doing a lot of work to do marketing, to reach out to press, to reach out to YouTubers. There's been a lot of positive social media response. People have been sharing and spreading the word, and that's been really great. And even like the Steam reviews themselves, I have all positive reviews and people really have been enthusiastic about the game. So that feels really encouraging and like fulfilling to me. But at the same time, this was kind of a short project that I was really hoping to use to kind of as a stepping stone to be able to fund some part-time work on some of the other bigger projects I'm working on. So that's kind of was the goal for this thing. And it still might hit that goal by the time this month is over, but 139 copies in 5 days is not going to even remotely come close, like at that rate. So it's interesting. You never know what's going to happen, and I think that's the important point of this episode is that designing your games in a way that you can minimize your risk if this is the case. Like even if you have a game that's fun and people like, but it's just not selling, or it's not selling on the platform you've launched it on, like what do you do? And sometimes there's no good answer to that question, but there are definitely things you can do up front to kind of lessen the impact of if things don't go well for you. And I think a lot of people, especially if they're launching their first games, kind of find themselves in this position. This is my 3rd commercial game. The first one was kind of a flop. It was a first time project and we made some mistakes in terms of like targeting platforms. It was sort of a casual game that we ended up launching on Steam and people really, really hated that. This Book is a Dungeon, my second game, actually has done really well, but it was a really small experimental project I did in 3 months. And I went with a publisher for that, Black Shell Media I worked with, and they've done a really good job of sort of just keeping it going and getting a lot more life out of it than I actually anticipated from my own efforts. And so that was really cool. And this project was another experiment to kind of do something on my own. So Missile Cards has been 100% sort of DIY. I'm just going to make something small and polished and get it out there and then do all the hustling myself just to see like what I can do with this. So I'm not giving up. I've got a couple more weeks of really good hustling on that I'm working on to get this going, but it's just a good example of like, even if your project is pretty cool, if it's unique, if it's something that could be awesome, if you think it's going to be doing well, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. Like a good game isn't enough these days. And even a unique game isn't necessarily enough. So I'm going to shift gears and talk about quick and fairly important ways to minimize risk, especially if you're a solo developer, if you're an indie developer working on a new project or something that you're not sure is going to necessarily catch fire, if you don't have an established fan base you can already market to, and especially if you don't have a lot of other options in terms of like marketing channels and getting the word out. So number one of the first things that I find is important, especially if you want to cut back on the overhead is to keep your team size as small as possible. I have a small indie studio and there's 3 of us in that studio, but for a lot of my solo projects, like I do it all myself. Like I do every aspect of the game design, the audio, the art, the coding, the marketing. I do it all by myself. And the reason for doing that for certain projects is to minimize, the amount of expense and maximize the amount of income I can get from that particular project. So if you have a team, if you have a studio where you're renting space, if you have 10 people in your studio, like you have to divide your income through all of those different individuals working on the project. So that can be really tricky because, if your game doesn't do well, not only are you not necessarily making your money back, but like you have all these people that you have to pay. So I think it's definitely useful to not be so eager to kind of ramp up your team. Like, let's add people, let's bring lots of people on board in terms of like permanent individuals until you're sure you've got some sort of income cash flowing going in and have some project under your belt. It's definitely useful to keep it small and kind of run a lean ship just to make sure that you have better chances to kind of hit that sort of break even point and be able to kind of sustainably create games. I'm not at that point yet. I've been working full time while also making games and running a studio on the side. So like, it's kind of a necessity at this point for me just to keep things as tightly scoped and small as possible. So I'm doing some collaborative work with some other folks later this year, in addition to what I'm working on now. And that's cool, but I'm also keeping it to like a very small team size. So number 2, it's useful to think in terms of creating games for a specific market, like a target audience. Yes, it's awesome to just create weird experimental stuff. And that's actually a lot of what I'm trying to do with a lot of my games. I try to do stuff that's not usual. But at the same time, I try to find pivot points where I can hook on to a genre or something where there is a strong audience. So you want to think about making games that have a strong audience in the genre you're trying to target, but also not being afraid to kind of put your own spin on it and make it unique, because you don't want to be making just generic stuff that is the same as everything else. There's tons of platformers and tons of other like very, game genres that have been done to death. So if you're going to target a genre that is popular, that has a strong enthusiastic audience, that can definitely increase your chances of getting more sales, but you also want to do everything you can to kind of stand out too while you're doing that. And it's also worth considering like what platform you're targeting too, because if you want to launch a game on Steam, doing a very kind of mobile-y type game or something that's very casual is not going to sell very well, just inherently because that audience doesn't want that kind of content for the most part. Obviously, there are different examples of instances where they do, but like generally speaking, if you launch a game on Steam, if it even looks remotely like a mobile game or has casual elements, a lot of the players on that will either, actively crap on you and be like, get this off our Steam, or it's just not going to gain traction. But at the same time, like if other genres like roguelikes and RPGs and shooters and some other things like those tend to do pretty well if they're well crafted games with unique hooks. So like again, it's like thinking about what platform you're targeting, kind of targeting a specific sort of genre audience that exists in the world, rather than just making a big cool game like, hey, let's do XYZ game that is super cool in concept but doesn't necessarily have a target audience that you can actually find that will buy your game. And if you can't find an audience to buy your game or figure out how to get to them, get your game in front of them, then you're going to definitely struggle. And I'm experiencing some of that a little bit. I knew going into this that card games on Steam, there are some card games, but they're not one of the more popular genres. So I kind of anticipated that maybe this game would, still do okay potentially on Steam, but Missile Cards wasn't necessarily going to be like a perfect fit for Steam versus some other potential platforms like mobile. A lot of people have said they want the game on mobile. That's definitely down the road and something I'm planning on, but you can't really do mobile to Steam without getting some flack for that. You kind of have to go from Steam first to mobile. Otherwise, you run into lots of pushback, I guess, from player bases. So anyway, moving on. Number 3, third way to kind of minimize your risk is to do research. It's worth taking the time, and this sort of ties into the last point, like thinking about niche and genre and whatever, but doing some research to see like, are people buying these games? Like, what kind of games are ranked highly in different, popular selling lists for the platform you're targeting? And are there lots of reviews? Like you find clues like, user reviews, ranking in different lists and within a platform's, sales kind of data and other things that kind of give you ideas about, what games seem to be popular and what genres kind of work well. So doing that kind of research can be really useful to get a sense of, am I making something that potentially could kind of tap into that similar audience? And at the same time, like doing research to see what is out there already so that you don't necessarily are just copying something else. Or if you're doing a game in a similar genre, like what can you do to make it stand out from other games in that sort of pack? So by doing that, you're going to get a better sense of the lay of the land before you kind of just dive in and start making a game without knowing whether there's really an audience for it or whether other games of that sort even exist or if they're doing well. And that can help set you up to kind of be better informed. And I think good information and being informed about before you dive in to commit to something can be really critical, because if you just say, I'm going to make a game about, donkeys bowling, and there's no other games about bowling out there, and nobody really wants games about bowling or donkeys bowling, for example, maybe that can work for you, but there's a good chance that you're going to run into some problems there. So number 4, this is a huge one for me, and it's keep your expenses to a absolute bare minimum. I'm bootstrapping everything on my projects right now. I don't have budgets for these things. I'm essentially working full time, and every time, like when I have a moment of free time, I'm chipping away at these things. And I'll work on weekends. I work too much. That's why I'm kind of hoping that Mystical Cards does well or better than it's doing at this moment. I'm pushing to kind of get some funding so I can scale back some of my other work. So at the same time, I keep all of my expenses to a bare minimum because it means I don't have a lot to pay back to kind of break even. Now with Mystical Cards, my goal of 5,000 copies to break even accounts for my time creating the game, because there was a big chunk of the development where I actually lost a lot of my freelance workload. Over the holidays, a lot of my clients sort of shifted and budgets got cut and things kind of moved around. And I found myself in a position where I was actually working on Mystical Cards as kind of my full-time job, just to keep doing something while I was also hustling to kind of line up additional work. So I kind of set my own, I don't always do that, but I set the goal of 5,000 copies sold would kind of break even for the time I spent to make the game, because I kind of needed to make that money back somehow. But we'll see. I don't know. I'm not in a great spot so far after launch week yet, but maybe things will pick up. You never know. But at the same time, my total expenses for the game, I spent $100 to get a nice piece of artwork done for the sort of a banner for the game for Steam. I had already had a Greenlight account, so I'd spent $100 it was a year or so back to get that. But other than those things, I didn't spend any money on marketing. I haven't spent any money on freelancing or hiring out any aspects of the game. I've essentially done it all myself and kept everything to a bare minimum. And then I'll probably have to spend $100 to get an Apple developer license for myself to put the game out for the mobile version eventually, but kind of waiting to see on Steam sale before I kind of think about that whole side of things. So yeah, anything you can do, kind of cut down on overhead. I'm working out of my home. I work, part-time off, whenever I'm not doing my day job stuff. Staying afloat is a necessity for me, and I'm not doing that through my game income at this point. And I'm hoping to eventually do that, but that's not happening yet. So I tried to scale everything back in terms of what I'm spending on things, and just even time to make things, very tightly constrained. So the final point before, this is a longer one, point number 5 of ways to kind of minimize risk is to tighten your scope of your game. And then once it's tightened up, tighten it even further. With Mystical Cards, I set out to make a much bigger game initially, and then I realized very quickly that was going to be way over scoped for this short time frame I wanted to create this project in. So I set out to kind of create Mystical Cards in 3 months, and it actually took me 6 months, which is still so much better than all of my other projects. I'm working on Nuclear Golf with Touch Fight Games. That game is 2 years in development now, and we're, again, almost done, but there's still more to do, and launching on different platforms can be tricky depending on what one you're targeting. So with Mystical Cards, I basically just cut out a big chunk of content and streamlined everything to kind of focus on making the content I had be very replayable and have reasons to kind of keep playing it and have that one more try kind of feel to it. And also adding in other things like unlockables and upgrades and achievements and missions to kind of get the most out of the limited amount of content I have in the game. So there's 5 bases, there's 5 decks in the game. And you unlock things as you go, but it takes a while of playing to kind of do that and progress through the game. So you can still get I think some people have already put in 10 hours plus in the game. I've beat it in a lot less than that, but I also have been playing thousands of missions. So it's a good amount of content. It's a $5 game, and I felt I kind of matched the price and sort of the amount of scope and sort of the overall. I kind of paired all that together to make something that wasn't going to be super expensive or super, super short. So people feel like they're getting their value out of their $5 or whatever. But yeah, don't be afraid to like cut ideas out if they don't work. Like sometimes you try to throw something in and it just doesn't work, and you can give it some breathing room and then go back and just slice it off, and your game will oftentimes be a lot better for that because you're kind of tightening the design and not having to just layer a million things on there that aren't necessarily needed. And especially if you're trying to minimize risk, going big with terms of like adding out extra content and let's throw all this bonus stuff in there up front. Don't do that. Like just focus on getting the core game you have as great as you can get it, and do what you can do within the time frame you have. Obviously, bigger projects are different, but like for my case, I set out a goal of several months to create something, and it took double that amount of time. So everything you think is going to take a short amount of time often takes a lot longer than you expect, and that's just something to be aware of as you kind of work on your projects. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up. This is a long one. So if you want to help me out, this week has been a roller coaster. But I'm going to keep at it for the rest of the month to see if I can hit my goal of 5,000 copies with Missile Cards on Steam. So if you want to give me a hand, that would be super appreciated. There's 3 things you can do to really help me out. Number 1 is buy the game. It's $4.49 at this particular moment. Only for another day or two, it's going to go up to $4.99. It's a $5 game. If you like card games, essentially this game is a retro kind of Missile Command meets Solitaire. It's very kind of intense and strategic. You can go to www.missilecards.com, and also the link is in the sort of the notes here below, and grab a copy of the game, and that would mean a lot to me. That would help me if every little sale counts and I can get closer to my goal of 5,000 copies. The other thing you can do is if you buy the game and you enjoy it, please take a second to just leave a quick review on Steam. That's really important because getting players to leave reviews is a challenge for a lot of developers, and those reviews, especially if people like the game and are feeling positive about it, are very critical because they help others gauge whether it's worth checking out, and that can be a positive feedback loop that boosts momentum overall. And I definitely need that right now. So far, the Steam reviews have been really positive, but I would definitely like to get more on the board. So if you love the game, just take a second to drop a review. It takes like literally a few seconds. So the third thing you can do is, if you like the game, like let people know about it. If you have friends that might be interested, recommend it to them. Let them, send them a link. Say, hey, check this out, whatever. Or if you're on Twitter, you want to retweet things, like that would be awesome too. All of those things mean a lot to me, and especially in the sort of challenging first week of launch craziness, it's not going as well as I'd hoped, and I kind of anticipated that might be a reality. But at the same time, like I'm still pushing hard, and I definitely appreciate every little bit. So, all right, that's it for today. Take it easy. Have a good rest of your week, month, etc. Wish me luck because this is going to be a crazy, stressful, interesting, messy couple weeks ahead. So thanks so much.